Okay, well, welcome everyone. I have 4 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for our next teacher virtual training for this month. And this month it is going to be on the 10-day drop, and I'm very excited that we have Lorie Gerkey here with us today. We are in a webinar, and so chat will not work on your end. But if you have questions, we would love to have your questions. Please put them in the Q&A, and then we will take those at the end of the session today. Also, at the end of the session, you will see that evaluation. Please do fill that out. We really do value your feedback. And so without further ado, I'm going to give as much time to Ms. Gerkey as I can because I know we are very crunched on time. So Lorie, thank you so much for being here with us today. And welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And welcome to our 10-day drop meets IDEA session. I'm Lorie Gerkey. I'm a school attorney and I represent public schools mostly in special education matters. And I'm your host for this session. So just a little bit about me before we kind of jump into all the nitty gritty, so you kind of know where I'm coming from. Prior to becoming an attorney, I spent 30 years in public education, 13 years as a special education teacher, and then 17 years as a special education administrator. And then prior to that retirement, I decided to go back to law school. So I've been practicing special education law and school law for the last 8 years, and in my second career. And so I really feel like my um, experience in the schools and as a teacher and as an administrator in special ed, it really allows me to provide my clients with this practical solutions to the law, and through the lens of the law we do these practical experiences. So that's kind of a little bit about me. And so I'm just really glad to be here, and I actually am from Cheyenne, Wyoming. I grew up there, so I'm excited to be back in Wyoming and providing some support to schools. So today what we're going to talk about is something that many of us are experiencing more and more and more, and that is students that have disabilities who actually stop attending school. And what does that mean for us legally and practically? And so the 10-day drop meets IDA is really about, we're going to talk about understanding what happens when attendance problems intersect with the student's right to FAPE. And when a student isn't showing up to school, we often think like, well, what do we have to do? What does this, how does this affect IDEA? And are there any IDEA issues? And how do we protect both the student and ourselves? And so this session, we're going to walk through what the law expects, what the warning signs to watch for, and then at the end, I've given some simple steps and some strategies and support ideas so that we can support students, so that we can stay in compliance, and hopefully they can stay in school. So with that, let's kind of jump in. Like I said, our goal today is just going to be to build this shared understanding of what attendance is, chronic absenteeism, what is this rule that we have for the 10-day drop, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how it connects, that our Wyoming law connects to IDEA law with that attendance, and then identifying some action steps that we can take. So please put your questions in the Q&A, and we will have some time at the end to address some of those questions. So let's just take a look at right now what the law and the courts have said about absenteeism. And so IDEA was never to replace or supplant any state or local authorities' responsibility to support students and families, especially when we look at those authorities that address truancy, juvenile justice, mental health, those pieces. We also know that IDEA recognizes that there are many reasons why a student is struggling in school or why they even don't want to come to school. And many times it doesn't have anything to do with their disability. But we want to make sure that we're looking into those kinds of things. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth. We also know that excessive absenteeism and chronic absenteeism has significant impact on the student's learning, and it actually can kind of create a school's obligation under IDEA for child find, for eligibility determinations, and even placement decisions. So that's really why we're here today to talk. I want to first start by giving you some statistics. I think that's always really important, right? So this data actually was reported in the attendance works from October 2023. I've given you the hyperlink there in your materials. I believe you'll get a copy of the materials, so you'll be able to see this. And we have this unprecedented wave of chronic absenteeism that's really spread across the country, not just here in Wyoming, but all over. And in 21-22, the US Department of Ed kind of gave us these numbers, right? 2/3 of all enrolled students, not just students with disabilities, that's 66%. They attended a school with a high or extreme level of chronic absenteeism. So, like in practical terms, that means that at least 1 out of every 5 students in those schools miss the equivalent of almost 4 weeks of instruction. It's huge, just huge. Um, it also, this number of 66% really does represent a sharp increase from pre-pandemic levels. Before COVID, we only had about 25% of students were in schools with that high or extreme high chronic absenteeism. So, as we know, when there are a large number of students who are missing school regularly, it really becomes significantly harder to teach and harder for them to learn, right? And chronic absenteeism is at this scale that it overloads kind of our ability to intervene, support students, and meet our legal obligations, especially when we look at students with disabilities. According to U.S. Department of Ed, U.S. Department of Ed hosts state reports. So our Wyoming state report says that districts and schools attendance report across all districts, we have had an absentee rate of 34%, which really does, this is our 22-23 data. And also students with disabilities are 36% more likely to experience chronic absenteeism than students without disabilities. So, I mean, those are huge numbers. And again, I've given you the report there. That's hyperlinked in your materials. So there is a difference between truancy and chronic absenteeism. Now, truancy, this is from Attendance Works, and truancy only counts unexcused absences and focuses on following the school protocol, rules, and relies on like that legal and administrative solutions, right? They kind of focus on that. But chronic absenteeism counts all types of absences, excused, unexcused, suspensions, etc. And it really focuses on academic impact, and it uses community-based positive supports. So there's a difference because truancy only counts as unexcused absences, but that chronic absenteeism counts all absences. And their focus relies on a little different focus for each one of those. Now, here are our definitions here in Wyoming. So we have an unexcused absence, and that is an absence that doesn't meet the district approved reasons for being out of school. So your board policies have what an unexcused absence is and what it looks like and what that absence is for. So if it doesn't meet those approved reasons, it's considered an unexcused absence. Now we have habitual truant is a student who is repeatedly refusing to attend school despite reasonable direction from the parents or school authorities based on your district definitions. So again, it goes back to your district policies. And then willful absenteeism is when a student exceeds the allowable number of unexcused absences, as you've defined in your board policy, but it's found to be because a parent or a guardian has failed or refused to ensure regular attendance. So that willful absenteeism, although when I hear willful absenteeism, I think of the student's willfulness. I'm not going, right? You can't make me. But our state is actually saying willful absenteeism is when they've missed all of those unexcused absences, when they've missed school for unexcused absences, but it's really because the parent or the guardian fails or refuses to ensure that the student is in school. So uh, 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 just a little clarification there in that definition. So in Wyoming, we have this thing, and of course, it's not just in Wyoming, we have it across the country. This idea of a 10-day drop. And it means that our law, here's your statute, I've given you the statute. Wyoming allows schools to drop students after 10 consecutive unexcused absences, but we're dropping them from the average daily membership. Okay. So if we have a student, we may, if it's a funding requirement, this 10-day drop is a funding requirement. Okay. So if here in Wyoming, schools may withdraw a student from school after 10 consecutive unexcused absences, right? We cannot count them under our average daily membership calculation. And not only have we looked at that through the lens of a funding, but we've said that we're dropping them, meaning we have interpreted, we meaning the practitioners, have interpreted dropping me is synonymous with withdrawing. And we're only not able to count them on our average daily membership. It doesn't mandate that we withdraw them from school. It mandates that we cannot count them for our funding formula. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So I know I can't see you all, but I'm thinking I'm seeing these like, what? Right? That's, I know what you're saying. I know what you're thinking. So here's our administrative code, and it does say schools shall exclude from their membership. Got to look at that language in the law, right? When we talk about a student's membership, it's really important to remember that we can only count students for whom we're actually providing service to. And if the student is absent, we can't provide service to them. So that means we can't count them in our average daily membership, right? If we're no longer providing instruction, the student may need to be removed from our membership count. That's what it says, right? Common situations for removing from the membership count is if the district's no longer providing that, then the student may withdraw, maybe they withdrew from school. The student withdrew themselves. We wouldn't count them in our membership. When a student's been absent for more than 10 consecutive calendar days, we're not allowed to count them in our membership. Or when a full-time virtual student fails to meet participation requirements for more than 10 consecutive program days under the state rules. Okay, so the key takeaway here is that membership is tied to the school actually providing educational services. So many schools have taken the exclusion from membership to mean withdrawing from programming and schooling. And they are different, especially when we're looking at students with disabilities. Okay. I bet the Q&A is just blowing up right now. Anyway, so our statute continues to say schools have this legal responsibility when students begin missing school without an excuse, right? So we have these attendance officers, and they play this really key role in this whole process, according to our statute, right? So first, the attendance officer has to work with the student the parents, the guardians, the teachers, to understand what is causing the unexcused absences. And this responsibility is going to play a huge role when we start talking about what IDEA is responsible for, or IEP teams are responsible for, excuse me. So the goal at this stage is to really identify what are those barriers to the student coming to school and try to address the problem early. If the absences continue, the next step is the attendance officer must send a written notice to the parent or the guardian, reminding them that school attendance is required by law. If those unexcused absences still continue after that notice, then the attendance officer, if they believe that the absences are due to neglect, habitual truancy, or willful absenteeism, and we looked at those definitions, the issue may be referred to the school board and, so you need to do both, and the district attorney. And at any point, the legal proceedings under child protection laws may be initiated. So, and that is not the district's attorney, that is the state district attorney. Okay. So again, some takeaway here for you teachers is that unexcused absences do trigger a legal process. There it is, right on your screen. And documentation and communication with family is going to be very, very important early on as we walk through this process. So when we look at IDEA and the legal standards for IDEA, when we develop an IEP, IDEA requires that the IEP team address a student's behavior whenever the student's behavior is interfering with the student's ability to benefit from his education. It does not, IDEA does not address truancy or excessive absenteeism, but we can firmly say that if the student is chronically absent, that behavior is going to impede their learning. So as you know where I'm going with this then, right? That the IEP team has to take a role in students that are chronically absent. So it's really important to understand that dropping a student from membership is primarily this attendance action. It's not automatically considered an IDEA action. However, we cannot stop our thinking there. We have to move forward. We have to say, if the student is withdrawn from school due to attendance, this results in the student no longer receiving their special education services that are outlined in their IEP, and this could actually result in a denial of FAPE. So special education protections, procedural safeguards, they don't disappear simply because the student has an attendance issue or is withdrawn from membership. Schools have to still ensure that they are meeting their obligation under IDEA, including considering the reasons for that absence, reviewing whether the student needs are being appropriately addressed, and involving the IEP team whenever necessary. So the attendance processes and special education responsibilities, they have to be aligned. Before we drop a student with a disability, the team should pause and ensure that the student's right to FAPE and all IDEA protections are fully considered. Now, got this really great case, and this is like a case like of one. I haven't been able to find any other cases, and actually this court actually said that we don't have any other cases like this. This is out of the Third Circuit, and for those of you, just for everybody out there, we're in the 10th Circuit. So what this case really means is that it's just persuasive, meaning our court, should they, sorry about that, our court, should they be faced with this kind of a question, they would look to this for persuasion. It's not binding. for us. It's not like we have to rule this way because this is in the 10th Circuit. It's not. It's in the Third Circuit, which is in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. So it went to district court. It is not binding, but it is persuasive. So when we don't have a lot of cases on a topic, and especially if we don't have a case in our circuit, our courts would then look to Pennsylvania for some persuasion on this. Tell me what you found. Tell me what you think. Are your facts the same as our facts? That kind of thing. So that's what that means to be persuasive and not binding. Okay. So here, this student RB, she's a 19-year-old student. She has trisomy 21, which is a form of Down syndrome. She has academic functioning about the second and third grade level. She has multiple medical concerns. She's got heart murmur and soft palate and sleep apnea, and all of her cognitive and physical challenges really do significantly limit her ability to access the general classroom. Her IEP calls for this therapeutic support as well as one-to-one academic assistance to support her learning needs. So that gives you a little background of who she is. So now, occasionally, RB's mom would serve as her one-to-one aide because of staffing and cost limitations. Now, I'm going to hit pause for a minute. This is something we really never want to do. Only in rare circumstances would we ever want to pay a parent to be their child's paraprofessional. So, okay, unpause. So now this case, charter school also really modified its strict attendance policies to accommodate her health needs, including that sleep apnea that she had and her heart condition. And both of those actually caused her frequent absences. So despite this, the school did not record any of her attendance consistently, nor did it follow the standard truancy procedures in her response, in response to her absences. Okay, so there was that history that they didn't count all of her absences, and they knew that there was a health issue, and so they made those accommodations to the attendance and those modifications to the attendance through her IEP. Sounds very appropriate. So in March, there ended up being a conflict between the school and the parent. And the school actually, from that conflict, wrote a letter to the parent stating that she could no longer enter the building without a scheduled appointment. And that scheduled appointment had to be with an administrator. And mom, when she read that, she understood that to be a no trespass directive, meaning you can't come on campus, which in her mind, if it's a no trespass directive, then that means I can't escort my child onto campus. And so she didn't actually get clarification on what that letter is. She just assumed. And so shortly after this letter, she stopped bringing the student to school completely. She just didn't bring the student to school. Didn't explain why she wasn't bringing the student, but didn't bring the student. So in April, the charter school decided to start marking her absent. And by May, the parent had filed legal action, and the staff was worried that her legal action and all of the attendance that was going on, that we were marking her now absent, this child absent, was hurting their attendance figures. And so their absentee rate was going up because of this child. So in June, after 3 written notices, which was under Pennsylvania law, the school unilaterally dropped her from enrollment. So they have the same kind of rule we had, where in Pennsylvania it says that at any time school term a student is absent for 10 consecutive days, they shall thereafter be removed from active membership roll, except for certain extensions, right? So they said the same thing, that membership roll, and consistent with this rule, the charter school removed the student from enrollment after she missed more than 10 days. And at the time of the due process complaint, the student was not enrolled in any other school. Okay. So now the due process complaint it really questioned the pendency of her placement the during the due process hearing. So, as many of you may know, may not know, but if you know, we've got, as parent files a due process, the student is what we call in stay put, meaning that the student is still in the last agreed upon placement. Okay. And mom said her last agreed upon placement was at the charter school. And the charter school unilaterally disenrolled the student, which constituted a change of placement requiring procedural safeguards. So that was the parent's claim. And the court actually found that removing a student under attendance rules is indeed a change of placement. And at minimum, that change of placement would require parent notice, potentially parent consent, and that the state regulations cannot override the protections under IDEA. I'll let that sink in for just a minute. So now the next few slides, please bear with me. The court had some very insightful quotes. And I never want you quoting Lorie Gerkey. I always want you quoting the law. And so I give you these laws, or I give you the cases, and I give you all the facts and all the statutes and all of that. So you can actually do that and not quote me. But I wanted to add these quotes in here because I think it was very insightful and it's very instructive for us. Again, persuasive on our part. So here the court said there's no evidence that the charter school provided the parent with a copy of procedural safeguards for the special education student. They did not attempt to reconvene the IEP meeting or consider whether or not the absences were a manifestation of her disability prior to dropping her from the rolls. Since the disenrollment was unilateral, it occurred without informed consent of the parent. And as you all know, we can never make a unilateral decision on an IEP, right? We always have to have an IEP meeting. Although there's no reported judicial decision considering whether a public school's unilateral disenrollment of special education students is a change of placement, so they already acknowledge that this is the first kind, right? This is the first case they could find. There is a substantial body of case law analyzing whether the modification or the termination of educational programming constitutes a fundamental change or elimination of programs, right? These cases distinguish between inconsequential modifications of a student programs and those that significantly affect the child's learning experience. This court now holds that the charter school unilaterally disenrollment of the student was a change of placement. And for all of you out there, you know, change of placement means something under the law, right? It means that there are all these other procedural safeguards that we have to put in place. And this school didn't do that. The court also went on to say that although the question of whether disenrollment constitutes a change of placement is a matter of first impression, that means this is the first time we've had the case, had to hear it, principles drawn from the body of law governing disciplinary-based exclusion and graduations provide a useful analytical framework. So you can see that that's where they came up with this decision. In both graduation and disciplinary exclusion cases, any change in a special education child's placement must comply with the procedural safeguards regardless of what outcome state or local laws might dictate for special education students' non-disabled peers. So again, the framework that they use to analyze this question, because this is the first time they've had this kind of a case, they used our disciplinary exclusions. And what do we know about? If we're over 10 days, we have to provide service and we have to make sure we do a manifestation and provide parental procedural safeguards, right? And then even graduation. right? We have to make sure that we have a meeting with the parent and we provide procedural safeguards and we provide them written notice, all of those pieces, right? So that's kind of what they used as their framework when they made this decision. The court said, like graduation, indefinite suspension or expulsion, the unilateral disenrollment of a special education student, which results in the absolute termination of a child's special education program and purportedly the termination of the school's responsibility to deliver FAPE, is a change of placement. Although the student's disenrollment was not necessarily a disciplinary action, it was precipitated by her chronic absenteeism. And finally, the court said here that the charter school is correct in asserting that state law provides that a student must be disenrolled after 10 consecutive absences. Absolutely. We have that same that same law here. But that law does not exist in a vacuum, the court said. Because the student is a student eligible for special education, the Pennsylvania Education Code, much like our Wyoming Education Code, and IDEA are also applicable. And to the extent that IDEA might conflict with a state law, it prevails under the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution. So remember, we cannot have IDEA and any state laws conflict with IDEA because IDEA will always win. It's a federal law. So it always, because of the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, it always supersedes state law. Okay. So the court just paints this whole big broad brush in its analysis. And it really does show us that there are potentially broader implications of the decision that we just can't ignore, right? This court in particular, persuasive as it be, says, listen, automatically, unilaterally withdrawing the student because they've missed 10 days of school is in violation of IDEA. Excuse me. So here's some case takeaways, right? That we have to ensure that eligible students, that they receive their FAPE. Schools can't avoid responsibility simply because the student stops attending. The IEP team must remain involved. We have to be able to look into the situation more. We cannot just ignore those 10 absences and then withdraw, and there we are. And then, oh, well, they're not in school anymore, so we don't have to worry about FAPE. We know Child Find always continues with the student, even because we know that they have an IEP, and now we know they're not in school. And so our Child Find obligation always kicks in at minimum. And then not to mention our eligibility and our placement and services and those things. So what steps should we take when we see a student with a disability who's chronically absent? What are we going to do? And here's kind of our standard, right? I talked about this earlier. In the case that a child's behavior impedes their learning or the learning of others, we have to consider positive behavioral interventions and supports and any other strategies to address the behavior. So again, arguably, there are very few other behaviors that have the impact about interfering with the student's education on that same level as students' refusal or inability to come to school. There are very few behaviors that match that. So when we have a student who is chronically absent or walking down that path of absenteeism, we want to make sure that the IEP team is addressing that behavior. And again, remember our obligation to reevaluate, right? We have to, we must ensure that there's a reevaluation of each student and we conduct it if we determine that there's educational or related service need, or that maybe the student isn't making the progress they need to make, and that would warrant a reevaluation. And attendance is truly a functional performance. So as you can see, increased attendance issues, a reevaluation may be necessary to find out and dig a little deeper into why. Also in special education and related services are always based on the need of the child, not on that disability category. And the reason I bring that up is that once a student is identified under IDEA, they're eligible, and the consideration of behavioral interventions is not dependent on the disability, or it's not depending on that behavior arising from or caused by that disability, much like we think about an MDR, right? We don't want to get confused by that statement, because under an MDR, that's what we're looking for. That manifestation determination review, we have to consider, did this disability cause the misconduct? But for interventions to be put in place, we do not have to consider if that behavior is causing or is caused by the disability. So is that absenteeism, is it caused by the disability? We have that obligation under IDEA to make sure that any behavior that is impeding their learning or the learning of others, that we address that in the IEP. So kind of to make this less convoluted, we have a student that has a disability in math, and we've got a specific learning disability in math, and now we're starting to see some absenteeism. I don't want anybody to think that, oh, well, we really, his math disability isn't causing him to not come to school, so we don't have to address it. We do have to address it. No matter what the eligibility category is, we must address any behavior that is impeding their learning or the learning of others. Okay, so we have several provisions that we need to kind of address here. So this 34,320, when we look at an FBA and a BIP, IDEA says it's, or the regulation, or sorry, the Federal Register says that it's not required component of the IEP, but Wyoming really would like us to consider that FBA and that BIP when behaviors are interfering with the student's learning. They would like us to make sure that we consider it a component of the IEP here in Wyoming. And we want to make sure that even if it's attendance issue, we might need to do an FBA and create a behavior intervention plan for the student to get them motivated back to school. Truancy is also a factor that really could trigger that need for that behavior intervention or those additional supports and services through that IEP. So be thinking of those kinds of things. When we start seeing the student have more and more absences, we want to make sure that the team is coming together and doing a little investigation and putting some things in place for them. And once a student is eligible under IDEA, we know that any significant attendance or truancy problem, regardless of the cause, should be addressed in some manner through the IEP. So here are some strategies and some kind of, some strategies that we're going to talk about. Not our final takeaways, but there's some strategies that we're going to do. So when you do pull that IEP team together, here are some of the things that you want to think about during that IEP meeting, right? What are some of those patterns or triggers that you're seeing with the student's attendance? Are there academic, social, emotional factors contributing to the non-attendance? Does the student need additional supports or accommodations to improve attendance? How can we collaborate with the family? And should we consider an FBA or an BIP? One of the big things that I think you need to do when you're doing this investigation and you're pulling that IEP team together to have the discussion with the student if it's appropriate, if he's age appropriate, she is age appropriate. We can ask those questions. Why are you not wanting to come to school? What's happening? What's going on? Is there something we're doing at school? Because if it's something that we're doing at school, much like when a kiddo will say, I don't want to do speech anymore. I don't want to go. I'm not going. You just can't make me. Or I don't want to use that accommodation. You just can't make me use that. I don't want it. No, thank you. And they're refusing the services we're offering. Rather than just saying, okay, well, he doesn't want to use it, so we're going to take it out of the IEP. No, we can't do that. We have to pull the team together. We have to find out why he doesn't want to use those accommodations or why he doesn't want to go to speech, and then create a plan and services that are going to meet the student's FAPE needs, as well as make him more comfortable or her more comfortable to participate in those services. It's not a matter of, well, the student doesn't want to do it, so we're going to write it out of the IEP. We can't do that. So those are some questions. And I think it's really important, especially to our middle school and high schoolers, when we start seeing more of that absenteeism, to be able to query with the student. Why are you missing school? What's going on? Do you have a job? And you're tired in the morning, you don't want to come into school, right? So there's all these, and we can be creative with how we're going to address that behavior, like we do with any other part of the IEP. We have to be creative and meet the student where they are and meet their needs. So if the team does determine that there's a need for an FBA, then once that's completed, that may trigger the need for a BIP, which is going to include some targeted strategies. And here are some positive behavior intervention strategies that you could probably look to. And we're going to talk a little more about some of those in a minute. But positive reinforcement, like those incentive programs, those kind of things, maybe adjustments to any kind of stressors that might be going on, maybe changing that environment a little bit for the student, maybe providing some counseling on coping skills. Maybe there is a high level of anxiety coming to school. And I don't know if this has ever happened, but I always think about this when I think about those kiddos that get very anxious about coming to school and they miss a day, and then they think about all the homework they've missed, so then they miss another day. So I'm always reminded of whenever I've maybe hurt somebody's feelings inadvertently. Um, and I realize after the fact that I did. And then I don't immediately apologize. And then I wait and I wait and I wait and I wait. And then it's like really long time. And I still feel bad that I hurt their feelings, but I didn't apologize. And now 2 weeks later, I'm calling apologizing. It always feels like it's harder to do. My anxiety gets even the better of me when I'm taking it 2 weeks later. So I see that with kids that they have some anxiety. Maybe they didn't prepare for Monday's test, and so they miss Monday. Well, not only did they miss the test, but they missed all of the day's instruction. And then Tuesday comes and they're like, oh man, I'm going to have to make up all of that work and that test and today's Tuesday work. And so they just don't go. And then Wednesday and third. So it's harder for the kiddo to get back into school because now they've got all this extra stress on them. Had they just come to school on Monday, that would have saved all of this. Had I just apologized when I realized I should have, that would have made all the difference. So it's one of those kind of things, making sure that we're giving the kiddos the strategies that they need in order to reduce some of that anxiety of coming into school. IEP teams should use interventions and encourage attendance, such as the counseling, FBA BIPs, alternate scheduling, maybe some home visits, increased academic support. We could possibly do that. It's going to be really important for us to monitor the effectiveness of any strategy that we're putting in place and adjust as we need to, much like we do with a behavior intervention plan or any other academic strategies that we put in place. We're going to try them, and if they work, great. And if they don't, we're going to come back to the table and we're going to reconvene and look at different options. Now, if there is a request for home-based services, and request is made by the parent because little Lori's not coming to school, you know what? Can you just pop her on the computer, let her do it at home? I'm fine with that. When we do that, the IEP team has this responsibility to create a reasonably calculated IEP based on the student needs. And if the IEP team did not previously have any data that would support home-based services, poor attendance would not be enough. You want to be able to try very hard to move the student back into school, get them reintegrated back into school with those accommodations and supports in place, so that, because school is where they really need to be, they really don't need to be in home place. But of course, if the request for home-based programming is denied, right, in that regard, because again, we didn't previously have data that would support a home-based program. So what attendance isn't the only reason we would do that, right? We wouldn't just say, oh, well, that's our data. That's just not enough. So if we're going to say no, please remember, we have to provide a prior written notice that is going to clearly document our reasons for saying no. Now, I want you to note this is a Wyoming school district in 2023. So at Platte County, if you're out there, hooray, kudos to you. But for those of you who aren't in Platte County, hooray for Wyoming and Platte County because they did it right. Okay, we had an eighth grade student, emotional disturbance, had excessive absences due to anxiety. The complaint investigator here in Wyoming found that the district developed and implemented an appropriate program for the student. The team actually considered and documented all of these. They reconvened multiple times. They added goals for coping and advocacy. They provided support during virtual services when the student missed school. They added an after-school robotics program for the student because that was an interest that they had. They developed an attendance plan with incentives, adopted outside evaluation recommendations to reduce that attendance anxiety, made multiple attempts to get him back in school, and remained responsive to his ongoing attendance and anxiety needs. And here are the quotes from the state complaint investigator. If a student is consistently absent and his or her truancy is affecting his or her ability to receive services in the IEP, the district should take steps to address the issue. Failing to do so may amount to an IEP implementation failure. Our own state complaint investigator was saying that. So, food for thought there. The record indicated that the parent was notified by the school staff when the student was approaching that 10-day threshold, and specifically that the student would be unenrolled after 10 days. One specific occasion occurred during the November IEP meeting when the district staff explained the removal from enrollment purposes for membership did not mean a discontinuation of the services. The unenrollment from attendance was a fiscal function. Came right out of our state. This is binding, right? Not really because it's a state complaint, but it's certainly very, very, very persuasive because it was really facts in our state. There's no indication that services offered to the student changed during the period of time that he or she, or that he, I don't know, was unenrolled from the membership count. So this school actually continued to provide those services, trying to get the student into school. When they weren't in school, they put them on virtual, but they continued to do the interventions, and they kept trying lots of things, right? And they even told the parents that we're going to disenroll from membership, but that didn't mean we're discontinuing services. So pretty much on point on that one. So some practical strategies, right? When a student misses school, you need to kind of think about this kind of a process, right? You want to start by reviewing the student's records, the evaluation, the IP, discipline history, to just see, is there any kind of a pattern behind these absences? Because if we don't have a pattern of these absences, then that raises another question. What's changed, right? So we want to make sure that we're doing that investigation first. Then what we're going to do is we're going to reach out to the parents. What's happening? Sometimes there is that change at home that actually explains this sudden spike in tardiness or truancy or whatever we're seeing in the student, right? And don't wait too long to bring that IEP team together, because we need to share what we looked at through the records and what we've learned from the parents and what's working and what's not working, and decide how do we need to adjust that plan if in fact it's not working, or do we need to do a new evaluation? Is there something else happening, right? So we want to make sure we're doing that. And then finally, when it's appropriate, and I've already talked about this, talk directly to the student. Find out why they're missing school. What are they trying to communicate with us? Remember, all behavior, good, bad, and indifferent, is communication. It's telling us something. So a student stops coming to school, they're telling us something. We just have to figure out what they're telling us. So sometimes it might be just as easy to ask, what are you telling us with this absenteeism, right? So how can schools improve the students' attendance if the parents don't cooperate? or help? Well, we have many parents, and I know all of you have experienced this. We have many parents who really believe that the school isn't doing enough. But on that other side, we do have educators that tend to have that same accusation about the parents, especially when we're talking about truancy or chronic absenteeism. Parents aren't doing enough to get their kid into school, right? Especially when we get into those older grades. So what you want to do is you want to keep the focus on what the school can do to address truancy rather than any kind of placing any blame on the family or the student. It's what can we do to support the student and address this truancy. We want to make sure that all of our staff are trained to look into why the student is missing school and to recognize what might be the cause, and if the cause might be related to the disability. Is it disability based, right? Is the absenteeism, is it disability based? And maybe if it is, it might require a referral, because remember, a child find, we're always seeking to provide services to students with identified disabilities or unidentified disabilities. So if we have a typical learner who is now all of a sudden having lots and lots of absences, doing some investigation so that we can see, could this potentially be a disability-based cause for the attendance and require us to refer to special education. Again, you want to try the best you can, as best you can, to work with the parents, get their support, offer parent counseling for them if they need it. Many times I know most of my career was at high school. And so many of the times I'd have the parents go, I don't know how to get him to school. He won't get out of bed for me. So are there things that we can provide to the parent that will support and help modify that behavior to encourage the student to get to school? Help families connect with their community too. There might be community resources like social work or mental health services, juvenile assistance, right? So that they don't have to navigate it alone, and we don't have to navigate it alone. We don't have to come up with all the solutions. We've got lots of we have lots of support in our communities. I'm quickly looking at my time, and obviously stay in regular communication with any probation or truancy officers working with the student so that everyone is on the same page. Remember, most of the time when a student is on probation or parole per se, there's usually a condition that they be in school. So making sure that our truancy officers are or people that are doing the attendance officers at school, that they are communicating with any probation or truancy people that we have, right? Um, so here are some interventions and supports that you can consider. And the next couple slides are these. And so like for instance, a check in and out. It's pretty simple, right? We're gonna find out, how do you feel today coming to school? How was your day today? Any struggles that you had? Let's set some goals for tomorrow. Where you're going to be here. So just kind of a check in and out for the student. You could also look at attendance contracts, right? Create an attendance tracker for the student. Maybe it's a calendar with some stickers, or set a weekly goal for the student. 4 out of 5 days you're going to come to school, or even that kind of a reflection journal. You want to maybe think about doing an attendance buddy, right? Maybe there's a morning call or a morning text reminder from the peer buddy. Maybe it's a check-in during lunch with the buddies. Maybe it's a shared goal chart, depending on the age of the student, that they create together to kind of track their attendance and have a little competition there. You also could think about small group directives. Maybe it's a role-playing activity that we have with maybe our counselor or our social worker, those kind of things. What's holding you back kind of activities. So lots of different kinds of ideas in these next couple slides that you can look at. make sure that we have some kind of homeschool direct contact, right? Some connection with them. Maybe there needs to be a morning routine, a readiness routine. So at night, this is what you need to do. Here's your checklist, and teach the parents to say, hey, this is what you need. Maybe there's a morning checklist in the morning of making sure you have everything you need so that you can get out the door on time. Teach parents those strategies. And of course, always trying to give some positives to the parent whenever we can find those, and attendance incentives, um, and recognition. Beat your own best time, right? Have the kids try to exceed their previous month's attendance, and then give them that kind of a reward. Maybe there's a raffle at the end of the month to see who had the best attendance, or a breakfast club for folks that are there on time for 4 days a week, or whatever we feel is going to motivate the student to get to school. You want to look at that. And IEP teams have this responsibility to be creative and look at some of these things. A vision board, my future self letter, like group discussion, that's that social emotional learning kind of lessons and motivation lessons. And then also, it's really pretty important for school-wide incentives, right? Making sure that we have public recognition, and making sure that our each school really values everyone being there at school every day. And don't take advantage, or yeah, don't ignore those kids that have really good attendance. You can use those as motivators sometimes as well. Attendance matters posters and those kind of things. Teacher encouragement. Make sure all of our teachers are really aware of those kids that are struggling with attendance, and when they're there, let's give them lots of good kudos that they're in attendance. And then finally, here are some takeaways. We want to make sure that we're doing some early intervention. The sooner we address the problems, the better the student's long-term outcome is going to be. Early action really does make a difference. And it makes a difference not only in the student, but it makes a difference through that IEP team as well. So early intervention, as soon as your case manager, you're looking at Lori's attendance, let's get on that right away. Collaboration is really important. This work is hard. You have a hard job to do. And this work works better when we have everybody involved, the school, the families, any community. We all have to support these students that have this attendance issue. We also want to look at maybe some flexible solutions, right? Don't just stick to one solution and that's it. Just like we do for IEP accommodations, modifications, goals, it's all individualized. And I know that can be daunting at times to think about all these kids that are absent and individualized strategies, but we have to be flexible, and we have to look to find those individualized ideas and strategies. And then I think that one of the biggest things here is the only way we're going to change behavior is if we really understand the root cause. Much like when we do an FBA, right? We look at the function of the behavior. What is the student getting out of that conduct, what that behavior? And this is the same thing. We need to take time to find out what is this root cause of the absenteeism, and then address that. And then of course we always have to consider these legal considerations, right? When we look at all of this collaborative effort and all of the things that we're trying to do and it's still not working, that's when we want to make sure that we're moving towards that formal options, like maybe a facilitated IEP, or maybe truancy procedures, or maybe mediation even. So we always have that, but we want to make sure that we're doing the best we can with all of our options. And before we consider any legal actions under those compulsory attendance laws, make sure that you understand why the student is missing school. Truancy, it might be actually connected to a disability, so you want to investigate that root cause first. If there's any debate about what's really going on, I always say evaluate or reevaluate. When there's a debate, evaluate or reevaluate. When a student's with an IEP isn't coming to school or can't stay in class, that's a major red flag, and we need to look at that. And maybe it's an evaluation that we need to do. Um, let's see, I've got a couple more here. If a student with an IEP starts piling up those tardies, you got to act quickly. We got to get in there. We got to create a plan, and use some of those strategies on the other slides that we did. And I do want to say you don't have to call an IEP, IEP meeting every time a student misses school. Remember, this is the extreme. This is, oh my gosh, we're looking at that 10-day mark where our state law says we've got to drop them from membership. And so we want to keep track of that and take a look at what we can make work in the IEP and the whole overall situation. Look at that. 1 minute to spare. Wow. Um, I don't know if we have questions or how we want to proceed, but hopefully you learned something out of this.
Lorie, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful session. I know that we have learned so much from you. And yes, I know I've had some people asking about the slides. Will that be available? They will be available along with the recording. And I have put those things in the chat, the link for that, as well as the evaluation. Please take time to fill out that evaluation. We base our future trainings on what your needs are and how you feel about the sessions that we provide. So please do fill that out. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at this time. And then we do have a few questions um,
Okay.
in the chat or the Q&A.
Okay.
And so